Amber, let's start with the numbers that seem to be in a free fall that we heard from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Michigan 41st in the country when it comes to reading and definitely below the national average in math in 4th and 8th grade. What do you make of those statistics?
Yeah, we have been seeing a dramatic decline now for well over a decade. In fact, Michigan is now only one of 6 states in the country where our 4th graders are learning at lower levels today than they were in 2001. So the data continues to be pretty devastating, and we've really got to look deeply at what we're not doing compared to what the states around the country are doing. That really kind of gives us a roadmap to give us a sense of where we need to go next and to turn this around.
All right, well, we hear from the governor and we hear from the state superintendent that Michigan should be a top 10 state in the next 10 years. What do we need to do to make this happen? Because clearly what's happening here,
right,
or what's not happening here.
What's not happening, yeah. So what we know is that there are states around the country now that have been making enormous gains in student learning. For example, Tennessee, just a decade ago, was far underperforming Michigan for almost every subject and every group of students. And today they are now outpacing us for student growth, and they're on track to be a top 10 state within the next 5 years. So states like that really give us a good sense of where we need to go and what are we not doing, right? One thing that we're not doing is that we're not really investing in our school talent and better supporting teachers and principals in schools. You know, anybody who's taught, my first job was as a high school teacher outside of Flint. It's a tough job, and teaching is very complex. It takes a complex set of skills that I think we often underestimate in our state. So these states have done a lot to invest in those skills and to do better supports for teachers and principals, better training. In Tennessee, for example, they invested well over $150 million in helping teachers learn and teach at higher levels. There's been also efforts to make sure that funding formulas are more equitable in places like Massachusetts, so that low-income kids are getting more resources that they often need to catch up with their more affluent peers. And then there's a greater accountability in other states for performance. And we have not really taken accountability seriously in our state for teaching and learning.
Before we get to accountability, what kind of disparity are we seeing for low-income students in the state of Michigan versus districts that may be a little bit more flush?
Well, we're actually in the bottom 10 states now for funding equity. So that means that our high poverty districts and our wealthier districts, the gap in terms of funding is thousands of dollars per student. And that does make a difference, right? I mean, when kids are coming into school behind, we already know that kids in very high poverty neighborhoods are already behind by 1st and 2nd grade. They need more resources in order to help them catch up. You know, poverty is not destiny. And we've seen this all over the country. We've seen where African American students are far outpacing. I mean, I'm talking about 2 years more of growth and learning per year than our African American students are seeing in Michigan. So, you know, we can turn this around. Other states have turned their systems around within 5 years, and we can do that too. But we've really got to get focused on the things that really matter in terms of teaching and learning.
All right, so you're talking a lot about teacher effectiveness, and we've seen studies that makes a huge difference in the classroom. Do you think that we have now effectively put in place a teacher evaluation system that will work for the state?
Well, the good news is that we are on our way now, and that had been held up for a few years. The governor just signed into law a new teacher evaluation and support system for the state. We've never had that as a state. There are states that have now had those kinds of systems in place for more than 20 years. So we're now taking a step in the right direction. The question is now, how do we do that well? How do we implement it? What kind of resources will that need? And that's going to take a lot of state leadership at the Michigan Department of Education.
Do you believe that we have that kind of leadership at the State Department of Education? Because sometimes it feels like we have jockeying between the governor's office and the politics of the situation, and where some of the standardized testing is now controlled by a different department. It's not controlled by the State Department of Education. Do you believe that we actually have some kind of cohesion at the state level to be able to get some of these things done?
Yeah, I think we're moving in that direction. I mean, the new state superintendent, Brian Winston, certainly seems like he's serious about that. He's working well with the governor's office. office. He's talking about, making Michigan a top 10 education state. He seems willing to make change in a way that we haven't seen in recent years at the state level. So I'm hopeful, but I think we're in a wait and see moment right now.
Let's talk a little bit about the city of Detroit and DPS, because there's some not great numbers coming out of there. They're the lowest performing large urban school district in the country. We've known that things have been tough there for quite a long time. Did that number surprise you?
Well, Detroit has now been the lowest performing urban district now for about 5 years. I think what's particularly troubling about the data is that it's not only the lowest performing district, it's that it's so much lower performing than the other low performing districts around the country. I mean, the difference between a fourth grader in Detroit, an African American fourth grader in Detroit, compared to a fourth grader in Boston is a difference of more than 3 years of learning. So imagine how devastating that is for that child, right? By fourth grade, you're already 3 years behind in learning compared to your peers in other big districts around the country. That's hard to catch up, right? Especially in a district that has so many problems right now in terms of operations, in terms of finance. So Detroit continues to be the canary in the coal mine for the state. But if I might add, it's actually not the lowest performing district in some subjects in Michigan. I mean, there are other districts now, several other districts that are lower performing than Detroit Public Schools. So we clearly have a really serious statewide problem in education. We've got an education crisis. It's going on all over the state. It's going on in middle class districts. I mean, our middle class, our white students in Michigan are now headed toward the bottom for white performance nationwide, right? I mean, our white students in Michigan are now on track to be 49th in the country for white students across the United States. Within 5 years, we're projecting them to be 49th. So this isn't a white problem. It's not a black problem. It's a statewide problem. It's a suburban problem. It's an urban problem. And we need statewide solutions to deal with the problem.
All right, so we've talked a little bit about teacher evaluations as a possible help in getting teachers, I guess, getting them more help in the classroom. What else are we looking at that we can start to do?
So, one thing that has been really effective in states is really extending years, especially for kids who are behind in things like reading. Governor Snyder has set a goal of making sure that all students in Michigan are reading by third grade. Noble idea, noble goal. A lot has to change, right? We need a whole systems approach to making that change. We've got to invest more in teachers in order to make that happen. For kids who are behind, we need to extend the year. They need more time in front of effective teachers in order to catch up. And there's simple things like if you're a rural district that doesn't have a lot of resources and it's hot in your classrooms because there's no air conditioning, right? I mean, a lot of us take for granted that schools would have central air or an air conditioning unit, right, for their classrooms so that students can be in those classrooms in the middle of July when people really want to be going up north, right, to their cabin, right? So simple things like that can make a difference for school districts in extending years, and giving kids more time in front of effective teachers is one of the most important things that we can do.
Okay, so we're talking about also, in the early years of K through 3 and making sure that kids are getting to that reading level. What do we say, though, to students who are now in the 8th grade, 9th grade level and to parents? How do we help them at this point?
Yeah, so one of the most important things that research tells us that predicts whether students will graduate and then go on to college is access to rigorous coursework. In Florida, for example, the state actually incentivized schools and districts to offer more AP classes. We know that if a student takes an AP class, even if they don't ace it, the chances of them going on to college skyrocket because it gives them a sense of themselves as college material, especially for first-generation students. And we have thousands of students in Michigan that are going to be the first kids in their family to go to college. So improving the rigor of instruction in high school, really important. Improving access to AP courses and things like Algebra 2, right? These are really important predictors of not only whether kids will succeed in college, but whether they'll succeed in a technical career program. Those are all things that other states have done and done really well, and it's really paid dividends for their kids.
The conversation will always come back around to money because people will say, well, we need more resources, we need more things in the classroom, and so that automatically means more money, so we need a larger education budget in this state. Does it automatically mean more money equals more success or more successful school districts?
No, it doesn't. Michigan is actually a top 10 state for spending. For example, we're a top 10 state for teacher salaries. So the money alone isn't the solution, but spending it more effectively and certainly investing more in the most effective strategies does make a difference. So it's not an either or, it's a both and we should be spending more. I mean, school districts have really had to cut back a lot to get through the recession, right? I mean, there was a, if you talk to teachers on the ground, they have less collaborative time to work together in planning. They lost a lot of that, right? Schools had to figure out ways to cut back during the recession, like all of us did. So this is a really good time for us to be having this conversation about what do we need to invest more in? What don't we need to invest more in? What do we need in terms of making the system more effective with the resources that we have?
Right, because you see people, when you just threw out the numbers, that we're in the top 10 for salary, but we are number 41 when it comes to reading. People will say, well, wait a minute, what are we paying for and what are we getting?
That's right, yeah.
And I also wanted to go back to one thing that you also said, that, you know, this is going to be like a 5-year, a 10-year plan. It's very hard, I think, for parents to listen to that and to hear that, knowing their child might be out of school by that point, or that Michigan has so much to do or so far to go that it's going to take a while to turn the wheel on this.
Yeah, and that is hard to hear. I have a 3.5-year-old, and I mean, the truth is I want her to be in a top 10 education state by the time she goes to kindergarten, right? And that's not going to happen. So I think it does signal the urgency that we've got to get serious about this now. If it's going to take 5 years to even turn the corner, then we should be putting things into place this coming year, right? Significant new investments in making the system more effective, more accountability for performance, not only for teachers and classrooms, but for school districts, right? And for state leaders. So there's a lot that we can do. And I think the question is, how serious are state leaders? Are they really in terms of making the decisions that they need to make?
Do you hear teachers give you any pushback saying, though, if you're going to hold me accountable for the performance that's happening in my classroom, there are factors that are happening in my children's lives, my students' lives, that I have no control over that may impact how they're performing in the classroom? And is it fair to judge a teacher on those things?
Well, that's true. And we have to be really careful about the kind of systems that we put into place so that we're not disincentivizing teachers from teaching in, say, a high poverty school where there are greater needs, right? And we often actually pay those teachers the least amount of money. In fact, we're a very inequitable state for teacher salaries. We're a high top 10 state for across the board salary levels, but the gap between affluent district teacher salaries and high poverty schools teacher salaries is huge. So we need to be doing more for the teachers in those schools, right? And providing those schools more resources to teach kids at the levels they need to be taught. But I think your overall point is we want to be fair about holding teachers accountable for performance. And one thing that we should be doing is training all of our teachers on how to teach the new standards. We're expecting more from teachers to teach at higher levels than we ever have before in our history as a state or as a country. Every leading state in the country made sure that they trained their teachers on the new college and career ready standards. We haven't even begun to do that in Michigan, and we're implementing the new standards this year. So we really ought to be doing that. We ought to be giving those teachers more supports in this big transition that we're going through before we hold them accountable for that performance.
All right, so what is the next year going to hold for Education Trust Midwest here in Michigan, and what are some of your focuses?
Yeah, so you know, we'll be continuing to do work around the Michigan Achieves campaign. We'll be advocating for more resources in teacher training on how to teach around the new standards, more supports for teachers, and also trying to really think about new ways that teachers can be leading this new transition that we're going through. For example, in Tennessee identified their highest performing teachers around the state, equipped them to be the leaders of the transition, offered them opportunities to be coaches of other teachers, and then they became the top state for growth in early literacy in the country, including for African American students. So strategies like that in the short term can pay huge dividends in just a few years, and we think that we ought to start in places like that.
All right, well, we look forward to keeping track of all your progress in the next year. Amber, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.